welcome to Playwright, a podcast about creating and sharing new ways to play. My name is Ryan Hamann. You can call me H.
And I'm Ryan Quintal. You can call me Q.
Q, you're into a lot of simulation-style games, management-style games, tycoon games.
Yes.
Have you played 2 Point Hospital before?
You know, I never have, and I actually, the only E3 I've ever been able to attend, I got to meet the two of the main guys behind 2 Point Hospital, and such charming gentlemen. But yeah, it seems like it'd probably be my type of thing, huh?
It's yeah, you know, I've been playing a lot of it over the past couple weeks, and I'm usually not one for these kind of management style games. Like I enjoy them when they're going well, but I'm not usually dedicated enough to really kind of wrap my head around all the economic systems that goes into everything. And eventually it all ends up feeling like it's a bit too much to manage. And I enjoy my time with them, but then I always kind of inevitably switch on the sandbox mode and just build the biggest roller coasters or, you know, whatever, instead of actually going through the management steps. But I feel like 2 Point Hospital is really kind of unlocking something for me, because more than anything, it's just like, compared to other simulator games, it's really easy. I think that's kind of what I needed to get going. Like the tasks that you're in charge of accomplishing are like pretty straightforward, and it doesn't have, you know, I put a thread out on Twitter, and I'll kind of recap here. Like one of the things in a lot of management games that feels less kind of player friendly than other types of games is that like the decisions that you make early on sometimes you don't feel the consequences of them until, you know, an hour or two later. You know, if you spend too much on your infrastructure up front, then you might not have the money to, it's going to kind of compound on each other, and all the problems compound, and then all kind of exaggerate and get worse over time. And so it's kind of difficult to trace back to the original problem. But 2 Point does a good job of really kind of simplifying, kind of consolidating down, you know, to the simplest roots of, you know, cause and effect. Like you're always starting off new hospitals as well. There's not this kind of endless loop of continually improving a city until it becomes a mega metropolis that you've spent, you know, years dedicated to. You know, you are given a hospital that is either, you know, somewhat fresh, or an operational hospital that you need to bring more facilities to. And you spend, you know, maybe 2 or 3 hours with that hospital and bring it up to 3-star rating, and then just move on to a new hospital. And so your consequences are never that far removed from your actions. And I feel like it's really vibing in a way that the genre hasn't before with me.
That's also so smart, because I'm thinking to myself, well, that actually sounds a lot closer to how reality works, right? There's no mayor that gets to preside over, 100 years of history in a city, but certainly the way that many businesses will operate in a lifetime is having 1 or 2 leaders that stay in a 5, 10, 20, maybe year period and do their damnedest to make life better for either the company or, you know, ideally the employees and the customers. Yeah. That's cool. I got to check it out.
One funny thing is that the passage of time is marked by days, which is like, it feels like a clean way to kind of denote how much time it takes to construct something, or how much time it would take to treat somebody, you know. So it's all marked out like, you know, 14 days to build this or 30 days to build that. And each day is around 5 seconds long, which makes for some really odd, like, patient interactions. Like you'll click on somebody and it says like they've been waiting in the hospital for 288 days. And I'm like, it doesn't make any sense from a narrative perspective, but if you consider that they're just there for increments of 5 seconds, like that's not an absurd amount of time to be waiting in line for something. But just think like, how sick would you have to be I mean, there are people that do have to wait a very long time for the medical treatment, but maybe that's part of the satire of what's being told there. But it is kind of funny to watch somebody walk from one end of the hospital to the other, and for it to take them, you know, a month to cross that space.
Yeah.
Wow, anyways, let's pitch our own video games and see what we can do to make them accessible to genre newcomers, perhaps. You will be going first today.
My pitch today is partially inspired by so many of the more recent indie games that are kind of playing back in turn-based battle space. Crosscode, I think, is one of these games that kind of comes to mind, but there's also been a few others. And the fluting battles in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Have you done any of these?
I have not.
These are the essentially somebody is giving you 3 bars of a rhyme, and you need to have a witty retort, but also stay in the meter and the rhyme scheme. And so it's almost a rap battle.
Oh, yeah. I did the tutorial for that.
Yeah, they make you do
fighting.
that one. I don't know why, but I've actually seeked a couple of them out, and I was like, would it be cool to have if we did it in a retro style, maybe toe jamming early, but if we did it in a more modern style, a 90s open world turn-based hip-hop RPG where you are growing up in a neighborhood and you want to assemble a fly team of warriors to combat some sort of, I don't know, corporate record label or something. And you go around defeating others in turn-based rap battles. And I love the idea of recruiting backup dancers and hype men and doing buffs and the whole thing. But that's kind of where I'm starting.
All right, I'll start the clock there. So, of course, as I mentioned while we were going through the pitch, actually, it's hard to talk about Assassin's Creed's rap battles without the OG in the mix, the Secret of Monkey Island's insult sword fighting, and the way that had evolved over the Monkey Island series. And I feel like Monkey Island brings something kind of fun to that, in that you're learning new lines as you go. You start off by having these kind of insult retorts with pirates that you meet across the island or across the sea, depending on which game you're playing. You start off, they insult you, you try to insult them. You don't know any appropriate comebacks until you deliver an insult, and then they retort to you. And then you know the retort for that insult. And then usually kind of towards the end of portion of the game that includes the insult sword fighting, there will be a greater test of your skills and wit, in which somebody will give different insults, and then you have to use the retorts that you had learned earlier for other insults to kind of appropriately match them. In the third game, in the Curse of Monkey Island, they actually had to rhyme as well, and so you had that kind of extra dimension to work with. And so if it operates similarly, then you're going to be kind of either limited by the number of lines that you can include, or you're going to have a giant dictionary of lines to scroll through every single time. So I don't know if there are ways to kind of contain it to something a little bit more manageable, but I always really liked that system within Monkey Island.
Yeah, I wonder if what we would have to have is more throughout the world, throughout questing, you kind of discover new phrases and connections and things that you can build into your arsenal of phraseology. And then the way that I imagine an attack being in this sort of turn-based style is, what if it's not just, I'm going to use an old Final Fantasy VII reference here, but you kind of choose attack and then you choose basic attack or something like that. What if it's more an attack is you having to almost Guitar Hero style get served up your phrases and make the appropriate connections, and it's when you do the 3, 4, 5 phrase in a row combo that you're doing maximum damage, that sort of thing. So I would want it to be a little bit more. I know fluting requires original writing from the person challenging and original writing from you to respond in a sort of extemporaneous way. So you'd have to maybe just base it all on your own personal book of phrases.
There was another game that came out last year called Signs of the Sojourner. It was available in the Itch.io Racial Justice Bundle. If people have that, they might be able to refer back to it if they're interested. It was a almost like a card battler where you had to, like, the cards represented conversations. You would have kind of a timeline of the conversation. Each card would have 2 symbols, one on each side, that you would have to connect kind of like dominoes And they would represent different like parts of speech. I don't want to say that necessarily. That's more of like a grammatical function, but like it would represent different like functions of speech where you would have like empathy or a joking response, or I don't remember offhand, but all these different emotions and different objectives that you can exhibit through conversation. And you would have to match what the previous person kind of ended their portion of the conversation kind of either expressing or requiring from you, and then the other side of your domino would kind of set up what they would have to do next. And basically you would try to get through a conversation both not knowing what they have in their hand, in their hand of cards, and having a limited hand to draw from yourself. It brings to light some kind of interesting metaphor for conversation. And so, I don't know if it would feel like it would be letting the concept down at all, but we could kind of deliteralize this, remove the actual language from it and make it just kind of mechanical and symbol based. But it would be fun if we could find ways to also kind of, give us good, fun music to listen to along the way as well.
Yeah, I like the idea of maybe pulling in, and maybe this is part of it. There's in the same way some games do. I'm imagining Yakuza, and you have sort of fighting stances in that. I love the idea of having stances or styles that call back to great 90s hip hop artists. You get some really pull in some of the, for me, the nostalgia of, people like the Notorious B.I.G. I love the way his stuff is kind of flowy and laid back, or your Snoop Dogg stuff, and then you could go more aggressive if you start bringing in like Dr. Dre or Ice Cube, or even like a nice melodic, Lauryn Hill sort of sound. But the idea of having these different stances, doing quests and maybe defeating people, and depending on the level of the enemy, you have an incredibly short battle, and it's just if you can pull off a 5-phrase combo right out the gate, it's just boom, one hit kill, and you just completely destroy the other person. Or maybe there's other mechanics where it's kind of like, okay, if you start out with 2 phrases, then they can come back with 3, and it keeps building and building and escalating and that sort of thing.
This could be really mechanically complex as well, like in a satisfying way once you actually learn it. Like, I was just thinking of how something like this could map to controller. It'd be neat if you could go kind of line by line, turn-based tactically. The lines would be kind of broken up into, like, each significant word would be given like a placement on the D-pad. And so as you're constructing your next line, then you can choose, which of the words from the previous line you rhyme, which ones you use as the kind of thematic through line into the next line. How like rappers will use, a word from the previous line as like to make a pun into the next line, usually like a joke that kind of plays on a second meaning of a word or something like that. You can choose like where to insert rhymes into your next bar. You could do the rhyme at the end of the line that rhymes with the word at the end of the previous line, or you can go more complex, like a word in the middle that rhymes with the word at the end, and then the word at the end of the second line rhymes with something else entirely. You can choose to kind of maybe use the right trigger, left trigger to extend or shorten the length of the line. So if you want something kind of short and punchy as like an in-between between 2 longer lines, or if you want something that kind of drops the beat and extends on a little bit longer than it would be previously. Like, it'd be neat if you can just kind of like construct this really kind of intricately and mechanically along the way.
Yeah, and I was thinking about just how cool it would be. I know that 90s nostalgia is kind of in at the moment, but being able to pull in the parachute pants and the great backwards hats and like all of the 90s fashion that would get you buffs and stuff and be armor and combat and really kind of celebrate the culture. I love the idea of both the ascendancy of the player as an individual, which I know a lot of games have tried to do things like that. But, go out and get great hip hop artists to be in the game. It's almost like if you did the 50 Cent thing, but you tried to do it for a turn-based open world RPG or something.
All right, let's close it down. Let's give it a name.
I'm gonna think about something great in like 90s hip hop songs. I'm thinking Gin and Juice, Juicy, Hard Knock Life. I wonder if Hard Knock Life actually is not terrible.
How about Nothing But an RPG Thing?
There it is. You've done it. Nothing but an RPG thing. THANG, of course.
Yeah.
And then, hey, you know what? If you spend the money, you can even put featuring Snoop Dogg at the end of it too.
Yeah, certainly. He always seemed game for some video game voiceovers. Actually, my game today is a little bit similar. So let's see what we can do with it to differentiate it. So I want a card game, digital card game based on writing and performing music. So you play cards representing verses, choruses, bridges, key changes. And the key change would be like a good modifier onto a card. And basically it's like you're hoping to kind of like build tension and pay off that tension with, either like dubstep drops or, a well-timed chorus. You know how a bridge will lead to a chorus, and if it hits the key change just right, like in My Life Will Go On or something, like you get this real rush that brings a lot of power to the music. And so you're basically just trying to create music that that makes the most of the cards that you have in your hand, and it's randomly dealt. Maybe the requirements or what suits a good round will differ depending on the type of music that you're trying to create. So let's try to kind of mechanically come to terms with the rules of music. I'm gonna start the clock there.
I'm trying to think about how to, like you said, like the building of the tension in it. One of those things that almost in some ways requires an audience, right? So it's like I guess maybe there is a mechanical way to figure out what that tension building actually looks like, but it'd be curious as to how it would work.
I think that wouldn't be too challenging because each card could have like a +1 to tension. It could have a +1 to happiness. Like a bridge would be a +1 to tension. A chorus would be a +1 to like excitement or happiness or earworminess or whatever kind of metrics you wanted to kind of track on here. It'd be a lot like, Hearthstone cards where they have these kind of power ratings that could do different things that can contribute to different meters. And then if a meter gets too high, maybe it has diminishing results. Maybe you want to get it to a certain kind of sweet spot before it pays off somewhere else. And so you're kind of balancing these multiple meters across the way as well.
So the card almost has these set attributes. And so there is a certainty about are the cards random or is it, because it's like, we've all had the bad card game draw where you're like, well, I've got no tension builders this time, but maybe that's, maybe you're just trying to execute like, okay, I'm going to do a high energy power the whole time sort of thing.
Well, that's the thing that I was kind of curious in putting this together is like, there's the temptation to make it all very kind of super formulaic, which I think works well from a card game perspective. You want to know what to expect. You don't want your card game to be ruled by too much randomness because then it kind of takes the strategic element out. But you also want to have a level of randomness in there because you want to have to think on your feet. But it's almost kind of working against the musical aspect because music does tend to be like somewhat formulaic. I guess especially like pop music has a very, set order of operations as far as, the first chorus, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, and then outro, And so it feels like I'd want to mix that up as well. I'd want to reward people for doing things in like maybe not necessarily the order that people would be expecting to hear it. But I'm not sure what that balance is yet.
What if there was some structure? Because I think this works better in a virtual space where you don't have to take up a ton of table space, which is obviously what a lot of card games are trying to save, is like, hey, there's only so much physical logistic that you can build into it. But in a virtual space, you could say, okay, at any given point, your hand is going to have two, bridge, verse, chorus, and maybe transition cards. Every time you use one, it gets replaced with another one. But now you've got kind of some control over, there's this or that type of choice in each one of the sections that you're making. But then you also have the ability to be like, okay, I'm going to play 2 verses in a row, hit it with a bridge. And then by that point, you might have 2 new verses in your hand. And you're going to be like, oh, actually, this, I think another verse is what hits right after that.
Yeah. And then you also have these kind of modifier cards as well. Maybe there's some modifiers you can always apply. Maybe some you have to kind of draw from the deck. So things like key changes, or even, putting on a vocal effect. I'd have to really kind of think through what these modifiers would be. But, they can maybe stave off repetitiveness. Maybe they can help kind of mitigate some of the problems, or bring more effectiveness to certain types of payoffs. Just ways to keep from, if you are having to play 5 verses in a row for some reason, like there's still ways to kind of mix it up along the way.
Yeah, that's interesting. So now we can do some kind of play off of what you can chain together, and then like that adds the tilt control almost in a way, right? So now I can say, all right, well, I want this flavor. Is that modifier, you think, across all your cards, or is that kind of in a different space?
I think you would play something, and then a modifier would be like a card that you play sideways on top of it, or, like you would be playing it like a card as well. And so it would just apply to whatever was on the table at the time, or whatever you were kind of pairing it with.
I think one of the things that you're trying to, that this could create is something that we both felt a little bit about Fuser, which is sometimes it's hard to tell what the heck is the crowd scoring of this stuff. Do you think that there is maybe not a crowd mechanic, but some sort of external piece of feedback saying you're headed in the wrong direction, you're headed in the right direction, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think there would have to be. I think, you could get on top of the numbers, it could be really kind of visualized and literalized as like how into the music the crowd is, how excited they are, what kind of emotions they're feeling. And then, the emotions could act as kind of like a modifier as well. If you can tell that, maybe as the tension is building to a drop, people would maybe feel more uncomfortable because you are kind of wanting to raise a certain amount of tension, and of course that pays off like emotionally when the drop is resolved. But there is kind of an emotional arc in there as well, and maybe you don't always want to avoid those negative emotions. Maybe you want a bridge that makes people feel sad, so the triumphant chorus can be that much more exuberant or whatever. Like you have to kind of keep an eye on, and maybe the crowd isn't always going to react the way that you wanted them to. And so you have to kind of think on your feet, like, how do I get them to where I need them to be so that this special card that I have in my hand, maybe there's cards that are very specific in their effects. Like, any other card game, you'd have one that you can only play under very specific circumstances that you need to work the game towards,
Yeah. Or even if like you treat the chorus cards, or the beat drop cards, almost like a wild draw 4 or something in Uno, where you really want to hang on to it until you're at
exactly.
top of a combo, or it has some sort of maximum payoff. You could even turn that really into a versus game once you start doing that, of like, okay, well, dropping a beat on someone else is going to, slow them down, kill their momentum or something, or make them accrue. They've got to rebuild up the song again debt. So whoever gets to the beat drop earning point first gets the most points.
Or it'd be kind of a versus Tetris thing where as you do well on your side, maybe it drops, unpleasant things into your opponent's mix as well. I don't know. But it would be fun if there was some sort of a procedural songwriting system going on in the game as well. So as you construct these pieces of music, you can kind of hear it playing in the background, or maybe, afterwards it plays through the song that you've put together and it kind of procedurally writes like, some verses. Like if you have 18 verses in a row, obviously you would write a very different song than if you had one verse and then chorus, bridge throughout the rest of the piece of music. And obviously that would require quite a bit of programming talent and acumen there, but I expect there is a way through artificial intelligence that it could theoretically be done.
Yeah, let's get some machine learning can answer all things. One day it will be able to.
That's right. Anyways, we spent enough time on that one. Let's wrap it up. Let's give it a name.
There is that old Andy Samberg SNL bit called When Will the Beat Drop? But man, Harmonix has taken so many of these good names.
BeatDrop isn't a bad name by itself. I mean, it feels very similar to Drop Mix, but it's maybe legally distinct enough.
Would we title the people who are doing the dropping like droppers or something?
I mean, that feels kind of fun. That feels kind of silly. Droppers. Hey, droppers, you ready for? Cool. Let's just go with BeatDrop. I think that's suitable for our purposes. We did receive some community contributions this week. I saw at least one or two notifications pop up on my phone. I always really appreciate when those come through. So let's read through another contribution from Ashton Hermann, who says, "Hey H&Q, okay, my latest pitch is a kaiju dating sim. The major cities of the world are under attack by 400-foot-tall radioactive monsters from deep within the sea, and it's up to you, a pilot for a top-secret international mecha initiative, to interrupt them on their paths of wanton destruction and teach them to love." All right, starting the clock. This is so interesting. There's so much to unpack here. So it seems like we are scientists that have constructed these, Mechagodzilla-like matches for these various kaiju that we want to, instead of going in to fight them, we want to go in to date them. So I think we have to make a lot of decisions. We have to decide how intelligent the monsters are. Godzilla, you don't imagine him as somebody you can sit down and have like a dinner conversation over red wine with. But at the same time, having this kind of animalistic, destructive, if they're too intelligent, then it kind of calls into question why they're destroying the cities. Like they would be morally accountable for evil at that point. And that's kind of not the fun of kaiju. You want them to be wild animals stomping around and kicking down buildings because they're just too darn big,
I do like the idea of, in the same way that you hear about scientists going in the field, studying wild animals, like learning when to be demure versus when to kind of be aggressive. And I don't know if we can program our robot, our mecha kaiju, to react appropriately based on what we think the mating rituals of the animal are.
I presume we'd be controlling it in real time, at least in like real time as per, dating game standards. So turn-based conversations, or you can give gifts and compliment Godzilla's new necktie or whatever.
In the case that we're controlling it directly, then I almost wonder if I love the idea of, you could almost make it feel pedestrian in scale in terms of like, well, and just instead of a desert and seeing a lion, we're in a city, a coastline. And so we're kind of looking at the animal and saying, okay, when are we going to respond like for like? When are we going to kind of approach what sorts of crazy flame colors does their body start to glow when they're feeling a particular way?
That's interesting as well. I mean, if we kind of strip out the intelligence and we just go on like animal mating rituals and having to kind of read these inscrutable signs that they would be sending across, like, you almost becomes like an anthropological, like you're really kind of studying these dance patterns and the color patterns and everything. Like there might be something there as well.
Yeah, and I think now we're getting to the age-old question that really everybody has on their minds is Godzilla just horny, And now we're there's now you can get into like, oh, well, maybe if you successfully attract this monster, then you can take it out to sea or take it into another part of the world, and it won't be in such a bad mood and want to destroy all of humanity again. I like the idea of the humans also being able to thwart you in some ways, like we see in the movies of like, well, things were going well, but then humanity brought out some tanks, and now we've got a new problem on our hands.
That's true. You're the peaceful interventionalist, and you're wanting to kind of hold off the military intervention by doing things in a more kind of, pro-social way, a way that honors the dignity of Godzilla. But, obviously there would be people with other opinions that would want to do things the old-fashioned way by just getting in there with tanks and blowing things up and stuff like that. There's always that tension in the movies.
Right. Since we control this other creature, maybe there's also a mechanic where we can call in things, like we can actually get the humans to intervene in ways that potentially benefit us, of like, oh, it's trying to run away from me or something, so we need to set up a blockade or something in this part of the city, and so that kind of directs the kaiju, and you're like, okay, well now they kind of have to turn and face me while I'm glowing all these pretty colors to attract it.
Yeah, and maybe you have to also be responsible for like evacuating portions of the city when the monster is kind of indicating that would want to go nuclear waste or something like that.
Yeah, that's actually a great idea. So now it's almost like an alternate win scenario, right? Where you can successfully romance the creature or successfully evacuate all the people so that you have as few casualties as possible.
Yeah, so it's both kind of a management of the city and management of the relationship as well. Let's see, we're only about halfway through the time. What other kinds of mechanics and dimensions can we bring this? So an RPG that has successfully incorporated the dating mechanics, I would say, is Undertale. Like that's not only in the portions of the game where you do explicitly date some of the characters and have to kind of respond in kind, but also just the regular battle system or the non-violent version of the regular battle system incorporates elements of dating games as well. And like you have to understand the other person and do something that would impress them rather than, just going in there with your sword and letting the sword do the talking like in most RPGs. Maybe there are like mini game like interactions. Maybe there are, different types of actions you can try out and see responses that can kind of change the dynamics of a battle as it's happening, to kind of gain a monster's trust in the first place and to win them over. Like, I feel like Undertale is a good place to start when thinking about this kind of thing.
What's interesting about that is I'm almost like wondering what you could do on the Earth-size scale that would still feel like a dating sim. So is there like, oh, you can rip up a tree from a forest or something and then like give it to the monster and be like, oh, I think this is like a food flowers that you'll really like, right? Or flowers, right? So a tree is flowers, and I love the idea of, yeah, like maybe this thing really thinks rocks are super tasty. We get a real never-ending story kaiju out of there. And like, so, okay, I'm going to find out what food it likes. And then I'm going to, maybe you're taking it bowling, and that's literally throwing boulders down canyons and all of this sort of stuff. And so you have like something that feels like really charming, but also you show a replay at the end of the romance, and it cuts down to on the ground views of people screaming and crying and stuff. So it goes from really sweet and romantic to
maybe it reframes a lot of the battles in these kaiju movies as being dates this entire time that just people from our perspective don't understand.
Right. we're like, oh my God, and cars being crushed. But and interspliced with not only the date, but, beautiful music and stuff playing in the background. Very sweet.
That's pretty fun. So there were different types of monsters as well. There's the Godzilla, giant lizard. There's Mothra, a giant moth. There's the, King Ghidorah, which is kind of an alien, three-headed Hydra type of monster. And so maybe it's expensive to build these robots. And so you have to kind of prioritize either designs that are fairly kind of ambiguous that could attract multiple different types of monsters, or maybe you really kind of specialize in one type, dinosaur style monsters versus like giant gorilla style monsters or whatever. And maybe you can choose to either continue upgrading a model that you already have or to build something else. So you have kind of multiple, weaker, less capable designs, different, mecha kaiju that you can use to date different types of kaiju. Or you have one that really kind of specializes and has all the bells and whistles.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then you can find out, like, perhaps to attract flying, maybe it's only ever one robot, and to attract a flying creature, like, okay, I'm going to need to buy the wings upgrade. And then, level 2 and level 3 is I'm adding these lights, and then eventually you can emit scents and pheromones and stuff.
Oh yeah, there could be a research aspect as well. You can gather tissue samples and stuff like that, and gain more intelligence, kind of like a XCOM game.
Yeah, I mean, it's even very Monster Hunter-esque, right? Like, only by defeating this guy or romancing the kaiju over and over again do you be like, oh, okay, it seems to...
Yeah, that's right.
It seems to be... And you can use world contextual clues of it seems to, like, stop for a second when it is picking up a scent, and that becomes a contextual clue.
Anyways, we're over time on this one. I think that one turned out pretty well. What are we going to call this one?
What if we called it Big Love?
Big Love is pretty fun. I like that. I was also going to suggest Kai Loved You, but I don't think that necessarily works out. I don't know.
As long as it's J-U, right?
Yeah, it gets a little tricky when you're saying it out loud. Big Love, I think, is a nice title for this one. Let's wrap that one. That came from Ashton Hermann. Thank you again, a regular contributor. And if you would like to contribute something, new contributors or old contributors, you can do so by going to playwrightcast@gmail.com. You can go to playwrightcast.com/pitch or tweet us at playwrightcast.
Special thank you to PROTODOME for the use of our theme song, Hello World, off the album Blue Noise. And when you're listening to things, 2021 February, what a great time to go listen to this week's latest Cane & Rinse, this week's latest Sound of Play, and this week's latest Sausage Factory.
All right, let's take ourselves out of the show with a redacted game. I believe that you're going to be the one that's pitching this one to me today.
Whew. All right. I think I'm excited about this one. Here we go. Redacted is an action RPG in which you hunt for answers in the ancient city of Redacted. Now cursed with a strange Redacted, spreading through the streets like a disease, peril, death, and Redacted infest this dark world. And you're tasked with uncovering the darkest secrets which will be necessary for you to survive. Armed with a singular arsenal of weaponry, including guns and Redacted, you require wits, strategy, and reflexes to dispatch the agile and intelligent Redacted that guard the city's Redacted. You will utilize Redacted to access an array of vast underground ruins, chock full of traps, Redacted, and rewards to explore and conquer on your own or with other people.
Darn, I was so confident until right at the end there. Like, this sounds exactly like Pathologic, but you can't do that with other people. It's not a multiplayer game, so it's a bit odd. Okay, I'm gonna throw a guess out there. Is this Bloodborne?
Right out the gate. I was really hoping that you would somehow. I thought the co-op stuff or the multiple people stuff might throw you, but you didn't.
Oh man, I mean, obviously, like, I was kind of on a different path for the majority of the of it there, but can't trick me with my favorite game.
Yeah, I mean, that was the other thing. If you didn't get it, it would be just so legendary. So
Crushing.
I was tempted. Yeah. The 92 Metascore Bloodborne for PlayStation 4, March 24th, 2015. Wow, we've been so long since we've gotten more Bloodborne, huh?
I'm kind of surprised that like for a game that has such like such singular identity, like it feels like that description. I mean, it is a good description, but it also
it doesn't capture it, does it?
It doesn't evoke it as much, and maybe it was the redaction that did it. But
no, I mean it's not like literally Bloodborne is an action RPG in the ancient city of Yharnam. Now cursed with a strange endemic illness. I guess that would have given a little bit more. Peril, death, and madness is one of the words I redacted. But yeah, when I took a chance and read that description, like you said, and I was like, I think there's a real read in this that just does not feel like this game. So,
well, anyways, that's a great game. If people haven't played Bloodborne, then they really should. Hopefully, this is going to be the year of a PC and PS5 version. But I've been hoping for a PC version of Bloodborne for a long time, and there's been constant rumors of a PC port that's been in testing and is just about ready to go, but nothing for years. So.
Hey, maybe they finally did remaster Mass Effect, so maybe there's hope.
Yeah, that's true. But then again, Mass Effect was a financially successful game, so I don't know. Anyways, we'll catch you again next week. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.